Hello everyone. Tonight we're going to start with the refined, orderly, and frequently cruelly harsh world of medieval Japan. Samurai honor, rigid rules, and severe penalties are all part of this place. Beautiful poetry, cherry blossoms, and a daily regimen that would break most of us by lunchtime are all found there. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to the video before you settle in, but only if you truly like what I do here. Additionally, tell me in the comments what time it is for you and where you are tuning in from. Seeing who is joining us from around the globe is always exciting. Let's ease into tonight's voyage together by turning down the lights and possibly turning on a fan to provide a gentle background hum. You don't wake up and decide your own course in medieval Japan. When you awaken, it has already been selected by birth, blood, and 6 generations of deceased people. Your place in society is a life sentence, not a suggestion. Did you come from a line of samurai? Fortunately, you are now in charge of the bow, the blade, and 10,000 ways to sit in front of your lord. A peasant by birth? Congratulations. You and your offspring will be perpetually stuck in mud for the next 40 years. There is no start your own business or resume. Once assigned, you remain in your role as a warrior, peasant, artisan, or merchant. Attempting to go up the ranks is not only discouraged but often illegal. In feudal Japan, you submit to authority rather than ascend it, and we haven't even discussed the ETA, the untouchables. Butchers, executioners, and leather workers are the ones who deal with death. Despite their need, society acts as though they don't exist. They resemble ghosts that have vital jobs but are still ghosts. It worsens even within classes. Assuming you are a merchant seems reasonable, doesn't it? You're near the bottom in feudal Japan even though you have coin. Why? Because it is morally dubious for you to get money without doing any work. Indeed, you are simply too productive to be respected. The peasants, meanwhile, pay such high taxes on their rice that they will starve if they cough up too much. Treason is committed if they conceal some in order to live. Frequently, heads roll. Samurai, you have honor, but you're always afraid that you'll sneeze at the wrong moment and offend your master, your forefathers, your tailor, or your sword. Ladies, you didn't inquire at all. However, you're also not going to escape this. Your independence ends where your father's opinion begins, regardless of your class. You'll obey those who command you to marry the person you're ordered to, and be grateful that you're permitted to study poetry. In other words, whether you choose to perform or not, you are born, given a costume and a screenplay, and thrust onto society's stage. It's poetic, graceful, and utterly unavoidable. You haven't even eaten breakfast yet. Feudal life may seem like it was all dirt and grime. However, Japan was terribly serious about cleanliness. It was almost a religion, which sounds nice until you go through it in the cold. You wash first thing in the morning, a stone basin full of ice-cold water drawn from a well or stream, rather than a warm towel and cucumber soap in a comfortable tiled bathroom. There is no negotiation and no heating. Shivering as though the ancestors are punishing you for having pores, you shower your arms and face. Soap? If you're wealthy, that is. Even so, it's made of rice bran or ash, and has an odd odor that a monk would have created as a character test. If you're fortunate enough to have one, the local bathhouse becomes the center of hygiene in rural communities. Villagers swarm the communal center, which is heated by firewood. And when we say communal, we mean no privacy at all. You take a completely nude, silent bath with your neighbors, boss, prospective in-laws, and possibly your landlord, while acting as though it's not weird. After cleaning, you soak. Keeping oneself clean is sacred. Is the water in the bath dirty? Social suicide. However, you wash what you can, when you can, if there isn't a bathhouse nearby. You use a twig or salt to clean your teeth. Your clothes are frequently aired, and your nails are kept clean. You act in this way because being dirty is viewed as socially and spiritually shameful, not because it's popular. And the strain is multiplied if you're a samurai. At any time, your master may examine you from head to toe. Unclean fingernails, disgrace, robe wrinkled, disrespect, excessive body odor while bowing. You may never get back up. Ladies, discipline and the scent of cherry blossoms are expected. In order to handle a rice mortar and still look respectable, rituals are followed for bathing, skin care is practiced with military precision, and hair is kept in intricate styles that take hours to maintain. Indeed, Japan throughout the feudal era was quite clean. However, there was a cost: freezing water, incessant grooming, and the heart-stopping knowledge that someone was undoubtedly evaluating your foot care. Assume you are born into the samurai warrior class. That sounds awesome, doesn't it? Poetic sword fights beneath cherry blossoms, silk robes, and fancy swords. Let's now discuss the fine print. In feudal Japan, being a samurai meant more than just yelling honor and brandishing a katana. The goal is to never make a mistake. Bushido, or the way of the warrior, governs every aspect of your existence, a rigid code of conduct that makes even your ancestors anxious. You live for your lord, your daimyo, not for yourself. It is your responsibility to serve him with such loyalty that you would sooner die horrifically than let him down lightly. His word is law, and his moods are like weather patterns. There is no pressure. Disobedience, disgrace, failing, disgrace, unsuitably raising your voice, disgrace. During a tea ceremony, are you looking at the incorrect person? You guessed it, disgrace. And you don't just walk away with dishonor, you're supposed to make amends for it, usually by sacrificing your own intestines. The statement isn't a metaphor. That is seppuku, the customary suicide that shamed samurai are obliged to commit. You drop on your knees, draw a small blade, and let's end it there. You understand? This was not unusual. It was a revered, even exalted method of maintaining honor. Your master may give you a short blade, a quiet chamber, and the words, "You know what to do if you make a big enough mess." Samurai were also supposed to train continuously. Skills like swordplay, archery, horseback riding, strategy, calligraphy, and poetry are all displayed with impeccable posture and the attitude of a man who has never experienced joy, only a strong feeling of duty. Are you laughing too much? Raw? Are you afraid? Weakness? Getting sentimental? Disgraceful? Your attire must be impeccable, your sword must be immaculate, and your behavior must be so honorable that it causes discomfort to others. Furthermore, you lose everything if you ever lose a duel, disrespect a superior, or lift your sword in unjustified rage. Being a samurai is about discipline, stillness, and getting by every day without blinking. It is not about fame. Indeed, you are attractive in armor, but you are just one eyebrow away from existential doom. Without a sword, poetry, or the possibility of a spectacular ritual disembowelment, you were not born a samurai. The good news is that. The bad news, since you are a peasant, your life consists of backache, perspiration, dirt, and government-mandated rice delivery. It's because the land tax doesn't pay itself that you wake up with the light, not because you're one with nature. Additionally, there are no windows or doors in your thatched house, and your bed mat was just trampled by a goat. Breakfast? A side of last week's pickled food and a cup of rice porridge, if you're lucky. Pretend you're not hungry and drink some river water if you're unlucky. The rice fields, which appear serene in travel films, are actually mud pits that are meant to gradually shatter your spirit over a 12-hour period. After you plant weed and pray that there won't be a bandit raid today, you stagger home to find that one of your oxen has gone missing and that the village headman wants to talk to you about your grain shortage. Taxes are unrelenting. Rice is used to pay them instead of coins. If the harvest was good, or your lord's nephew happened to ride a horse through your plot during a military exercise, your family will eat what's left, which isn't much. Do you want to voice your displeasure? That's very cute. You can't. If you respond, you will be whipped, banished, or made a corpse. If you're lucky, you may rise to the position of village elder, which implies that although people still don't listen to you, they now seek your counsel before disregarding it. Additionally, keep in mind that you are legally prohibited from leaving your village without authorization. You are essentially a prisoner with seasonal ankle rot who is fed rice. Celebrations, some exist. You dance in a circle, get wasted on week's sake, and try not to think about how planting season will begin again in 4 days. Yes, you are the backbone of the economy, the reason samurai eat, and the person that everyone forgets they even exist. And no, you don't get a day off, since in medieval Japan, hard effort, suffering across generations, and maintaining extremely low expectations are all valued. You're starving. You are, of course. Since morning, you have been planting, tilling, perspiring, and graciously surviving. It's time to eat. However, eating was not an indulgence in feudal Japan. Simplicity, survival, and avoiding choking on a fishbone in front of your in-laws are their main concerns. You eat rice if you're a peasant. You can eat rice for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's real rice if you are lucky. It's barley masquerading as rice if you're not. If the gods are feeling generous, you may receive a turnip or two and some pickled radish. Meat? That's for the daimyo or that one chicken that gave you a strange look and then vanished for no apparent reason. Fish? Occasionally. However, it's salted, dried, and enough sharp to file your teeth. Soup? Miso soup is typically defined as hot salt water with 2 floating leaves. Yes, it has flavor in the same way that seawater hydrates. Now, samurai do have access to healthier food. However, you also eat last, following your lord, his visitors, and anybody else he wishes to impress. That entails cold rice, cold soup, and the timeless delight of observing others eat while acting as though waiting is an immense honor. It's all seasonal too. It's probably non-existent if you don't harvest it yourself, and there's no worldwide supply chain or refrigeration, not because it's popular. Thus, winter is simply nature's way of urging people to fast. God forbid you contract food poisoning. Healthcare is hopeful. Lying down and reflecting about your ancestors is the local medicine. Either you'll improve or you'll end up like them. Theft of food is a serious offense. If you steal a bowl of rice, you won't face consequences. This is a public demonstration of why we don't handle the daimyo's daikon. Tea? It is present, but not in the way you think. The tea ceremony is a multifaceted ritual that focuses more on manners, posture, and existential humility than it does on slake thirst. Meals are therefore peaceful, revered, and sacred. However, they are often small, tasteless, and include at least one crunchy mystery item. You can't complain either, unless you want to eat your next meal through your nose, that is. You just finished a small bowl of somewhat crispy fish soup. Someone makes a ridiculous statement. Your lord might mumble a poor haiku. Perhaps a proverb is misquoted by your local elder. Perhaps your neighbor is adamant that his cow can forecast the weather, and you consider correcting them for a single careless, stupid moment. Don't. Your opinion was a liability in medieval Japan. There is no such thing as free speech. It's a quick route to shame, banishment, or even decapitation that ends one's career. Every statement has a weight, and the social system is inflexible. Talk over your class. It is impudent of you. Criticism of a superior, you're arrogant. Don't you have a joke that works? Treason nearby is what that is. Even with families, you have to be careful. A son doesn't talk over his dad. Wives don't correct their spouses. And unless they've always intended to use a sword point to explore the afterlife, nobody, not even the daimyo, questions them. Even in their rage, samurai are taught to speak calmly and measuredly. A dull blade is worse than a sharp tongue. It's not honorable, it's risky. Additionally, it could put someone in the embarrassing situation of needing to murder you in order to regain their honor. Thus, we must apologize. Apologies are an art form in feudal Japan. You don't only apologize, you bow, you grovel. You might create a poem about your embarrassment. You may even send a present, such as a decorative comb or a live bird, with the earnest hope that the recipient will not choose to duel you nonetheless. And if your tone is too informal, good for you. A poorly chosen word could be taken as spiritual decay, defiance, or sarcasm. Generally speaking, silence is safer. Even humor is a fine line. It could be interpreted as disrespectful to laugh at the wrong thing. Sharing a laugh with a significant other could suggest that you consider yourself on their level. And that? People are inexplicably transferred to the far north in this way. Therefore, in theory, you are free to speak. However, in reality, you grin, nod, and hope your thoughts never try to come out of your mouth. Loose lips don't simply wreck ships in feudal Japan. They destroy reputations, social status, and occasionally your entire family tree. Fashion was not a means of self-expression in feudal Japan. It's about making sure that simply by looking at your sleeves, everyone can tell how far below them you are. Your personality is not reflected in your attire. Your location, your goal, and whether or not you are legally permitted to carry a weapon without being tackled by a samurai are all reflected in it. Let's begin at the highest level. Samurai are always respectful and they wear layers of silk robes, occasionally with armor. Their attire is thoughtfully chosen to convey readiness and prestige. The earthy browns, rich blues, and the odd blood-red flare are the colors. Stylish, sinister, and nearly always suggestive, I have killed a man for nothing less than a fashion blunder. The swords, of course. The long and short swords that make up a samurai's daisho are more than just a collection of weapons. It is a walking symbol of power. It is only a last option to draw one in public. The first step to being sharply scolded in public is wearing them incorrectly. In contrast, peasants are humble and wear cotton. Your clothes are mostly beige, grey, and brown. They are not minimalists, that's for sure. The reason for this is that dyed fabric is expensive, and you're too preoccupied with getting by to think about matching colors. Yes, I work in mud, your attire indicates. No, this is not the lifestyle I choose. Yes, I only own these sandals. Finer materials are worn by merchants. After all, they are wealthy. However, they keep it subdued because they are still seen as inferior to peasants and samurai in society. Not too rich, yet rich. Silk? Sure, but quiet. Rich merchant families are skilled at maintaining a respectable appearance so that a bored warrior on patrol won't notice them. Craftspeople and artisans wear modest yet well-groomed clothing. Their apparel is functional, long-lasting, and, above all, inconspicuous. Some women must balance grace, submission, and wearing 12 pounds of wrapped iconography, while others view drawing attention to oneself as a personality flaw. Codes are used for hairstyles. Seasons influence kimono patterns. Congratulations! You've just embarrassed your entire family and possibly sparked a gossip war in the neighborhood if you choose to wear a color that isn't appropriate for that festival. To put it briefly, clothes isn't the only thing you wear. It's about status, custom, and enduring daily judgment from your mother-in-law and heaven. Imagine moonlit strolls under cherry blossoms, poetry being murmured beneath paper lanterns, or perhaps a samurai and a forbidden princess sharing a passionate kiss. Yes. No. Love is a side quest that is unlikely to be accomplished in feudal Japan. Feelings are not the point of marriage. It's about avoiding embarrassing your ancestors, rice taxes, status, and alliances. Your parents and possibly the village elder arrange your marriage if you're a peasant. The topic of romantic compatibility is not covered. Healthy teeth and strong legs are regarded as more crucial. There are much more stakes if you come from a samurai family. Politicians use marriages as instruments. Your partner is selected to obtain property, strengthen a clan relationship, or settle a dispute with a lovely kimono. Happiness is not the aim. It's stability, preferably, stability that doesn't give way during harvest. Love letters, perhaps, but only if they are secretly transmitted by a maid who is unquestionably too knowledgeable, written in flawless calligraphy, and employ the proper seasonal metaphors. Naturally, women have considerably less influence. Samurai daughters may be married off at the age of 15, and they must learn calligraphy, embroidery, manners, and the art of never publicly expressing disappointment. Her duties include serving tea, having boys, and never falling in love with the flute teacher. Poets, plays, and tragic ghost stories are the purview of true romantic love, the kind that involves impassioned declarations and stolen glances. A no drama about two doomed lovers who turn into mist is a must-watch if you want to experience love in Japan. Good luck if you attempt to deviate from the relational framework you have been given. Exile, shame, or execution by sword are consequences of adultery. Depending on who arrives first, your husband, your lord, or your in-laws may administer the penalty. Taking a concubine was widespread, even among samurai. However, that didn't make things any simpler. It only made more people silently disappointed. People did fall in love then, covertly, in agony, sometimes with the wrong person, and always at the most inconvenient moment. Because love was not prohibited in feudal Japan, simply put, it was dangerously awkward. Death is not a faraway idea in feudal Japan. It's your roommate, your neighbor, or your co-worker who is constantly there, yet never pays rent. You don't make retirement plans, you plan for your leave, because here, death is not a tragedy. The script calls for that. The samurai should come first. These brave warriors carry 2 swords and a customized death plan with them. Seppuku if they lose a fight. Seppuku insult their honor. Seppuku with dramatic background music and sake spilled on the daimyo's kimono. And it's not private, though there is a lot more internal bleeding. It is ceremonial, public, and executed with the same level of accuracy as a tea ceremony. However, don't assume that peasants are living longer. You are starving if you are a farmer, and the rice crop is a failure. Your head might be used to convey a very harsh point if your village is unable to satisfy its tax quota. A drought, a plague, a bandit raid. Choose your preferred flavor of unexpected death, and good luck fending it off when your best defense is a strong belief in herbal optimism and warm tea. Speaking of bandits, they are genuine, present everywhere, and unconcerned that you grew those daikon radishes all year. People simply avoid traveling outside of towns unless it is absolutely necessary because the roads are so treacherous. In actuality, the statement, "Perhaps we'll visit your cousin next year," signifies, "I like being alive." For women, giving birth is a lottery. Difficulties? Unfortunately. Midwives are useful, but surgical alternatives are largely pray harder and boil another towel. You might be expected to follow your husband with a dagger, not emotionally but literally, if he dies in shame. Not to mention nature itself. Japan is a master of disasters, earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, and famines. A well-tied roof and a strong sense of spiritual acceptance are your sole defenses against your home being buried or swept away at any time. The darkest part, though, you're supposed to take it all in stride. It is deemed undignified to cry out in terror or to resist fate. A true hero bows before dying, writes a poem, and dies as if it were just another awkward clan supper. Feudal Japan is really stunning, but the decor also incorporates death. You are encouraged to live your truth, be your own person, and pursue your aspirations in today's world. Whatever your clan tells you is your truth in feudal Japan. Individualism is a warning sign, not a virtue. You are a modest branch on a very significant family tree, not a lone star of destiny, and your duty is to protect the tree from catching fire due to any humiliating conduct, like expressing opinions or falling in love with a merchant's daughter. Your clan is everything: your future, your identity, and your reputation. Your family name is the foundation of it all. You are a part of a complex web of duties, honor, and expectations that could easily pass for a spiritual spreadsheet. Life is based on association. Do you enjoy cooking and would like to create a noodle shop? That's very cute. Unfortunately, until further notice, you will be scrubbing hooves because your clan farms horses. Show a desire to paint? Fantastic. The temple that your family funds will be decorated by you, with stringent rules in complete quiet. Additionally, don't even consider scandal. Everyone feels ashamed after one mishandled affair, intoxicated episode, or sassy public poem. Your siblings? Rejected? Mommy? Terrified? Your great-uncle? He might need to disembowel himself in order to improve the family's reputation. You're not human. You are a liability with legs, a chess piece, and a representation. However, if you fulfill your position well, bow appropriately, and marry the person you are supposed to marry, your tribe may even mention your name with a modicum of pride. And that's what a personal achievement badge looks like in feudal Japan. Imagine surviving the honor system, the rice tax, the sword duels, and the social order. Well done. Try to survive the weather now. Feudal Japan's environmental turmoil is a nightmare come true. The view is wonderful. The climate wants you dead. Take typhoons first. Huge storms that come like wrathful gods, bringing wind, rain, and the strength of a wall made of rice paper. Roots are flying off. Roads disappear. The rice you planted all season, gliding slowly downstream. Then there are seismic events, abrupt, aggressive, and totally erratic. No warning siren is sounding, no alert system, only a slight rumble. A time of existential uncertainty. After that, your house is oriented sideways. You still have to be concerned about fires, even if you make it through the earthquake, because wood is used to make everything, including the poor choices you made. Flooding occurs frequently. The rivers swell when it rains too much. Your village turns into a soup bowl filled with mud. Your crops perish. Your animals become lost. Naturally, your landlord still wants taxes, now with interest. Droughts are equally harsh. The soil is cracked and the rice fields are as dry as a monk's humor after weeks of harsh sun and no rain. To the gods you pray. You do rituals. You begin to look suspiciously at the neighbor's well. And winter comes next. It's hardly a snowy paradise, more akin to fires that extinguish by midnight and bone-deep, icy blankets. It's not central for heating. It's a collective pain. You hope frostbite isn't in this year's trend as you warm your hands over a clay brazier. Sometimes even volcanoes join the celebration. The Ring of Fire includes Japan. Indeed, it's as enjoyable as it sounds. Whole areas could be covered in ash, lava, or the embarrassing discovery that your shrine has turned into a rock garden due to eruptions. No national relief effort, no FEMA. You reconstruct your house in the event that it collapses. You go hungry if your food goes bad. You still owe taxes if your lord's estate is also impacted. After all, disaster is not a justification. Nature was not a background feature in feudal Japan. It serves as a constant reminder that even the gods could be having a rough time. In feudal Japan, authority was distributed downward. So do accountability, expectations, and culpability. Do you consider yourself significant? Rethink your thought. Above you, there's always someone. Suppose you are a peasant. The village headman is in charge of your life. He reports to the local samurai, who in turn report to the daimyo, who in turn report to the shogun, who may or may not whisper to the emperor, who does little more than haunt the city in pricey robes. Not even the ferocious sword-wielding samurai who uphold the rule of law are at the top. Throughout their life they serve a lord, wait for commands, and sometimes engage in combat for territory they do not own, for glory they will never experience firsthand. Theoretically, they are respected. In truth, they're really well-dressed middle management with a katana. Up until the shogun determines they are being too brazen, the daimyo, those strong lords who command armies and provinces, may appear untouchable. Then all of a sudden their castles are being examined, their correspondence are being intercepted, and their political ambitions are being softly lifted from their heads. Even Japan's most powerful man, the military dictator known as the shogun, must monitor the court, the clans, the economy, and at least 4 cousins who are attempting to taint his tea. Yes, he is in charge, yet he has trouble sleeping. Although he has no real authority, the emperor is technically superior to everyone else. You can't ignore him, yet you can't touch him like a holy artifact. He names eras, blesses rituals, and sometimes composes poetry. He's most likely broke as well. You don't ascend this hierarchy, hence it's not adaptable. Like an extremely compliant bonsai tree, you are put in place and remain there. Ambition is feared rather than praised. You go closer to a sword in your back the higher you climb. Authority is enforced below and respect is demanded upward. Orders are followed without discussion. Arguments can be harmful, and is there any indication that you feel superior to others? That's a death wish dressed in formal wear, not ambition. Therefore, whether you are a lord, samurai, trader, or peasant, someone below you is hoping you trip, and someone above you controls your destiny. What you learn, or do not learn at all, depends solely on your position in the social hierarchy in feudal Japan. As a spoiler, the ladder is generally invisible and sometimes on fire if you're close to the bottom. Let's begin at the highest level, children of samurai. They are fortunate. They receive instruction in reading, writing, swordsmanship, etiquette, poetry, archery, horseback riding, and the age-old skill of maintaining an unimpressed appearance at all times from an early age. By the age of 14, a samurai lad learns how to write a death poem. You are still learning cursive. Although their schooling is demanding, it serves a purpose: to defend, serve, and avoid bringing shame to the tribe. They learn Bushido techniques, Chinese classics, and how to bow so accurately that the gods pay attention. Then there are families who are artisans and merchants. They just receive the education required for business, which often consists of math, record-keeping, and possibly some reading. Confucius is not being read by you. You're learning how to figure out how much pickled turnips will cost in quantity. Realistic? Indeed, magnificent? Not at all. Children of peasants? This is how education seems. It's a hoe, it's rice. Before the sun beats us to it, get to work. You learn from your parents how to survive, how to farm, and how to avoid dying in front of the tax collector. Literacy is uncommon. Attending school is a luxury. You will only read the scroll that explains why your taxes have increased once more and is nailed to a tree. What about girls? You don't receive any formal education unless you come from a wealthy household. You receive instruction in tea ceremonies, etiquette, needlework, domestic skills, and how to keep quiet while running a household. If you're lucky, you may pick up poetry or calligraphy, but only if it doesn't take your mind off folding laundry with spiritual accuracy. Personal development was not a goal of education in feudal Japan. It's about playing your part without questioning it. Most elders would faint into their sake cups at the thought of learning for pleasure. Indeed, information is power, which is why they maintain such strict control over it. The beauty of feudal Japan is amazing. Everything appears to be intended to calm the soul and please your ancestors, from the shape of a fan to the positioning of a teacup. Here's the catch, though. If you do it incorrectly, you will be judged. In feudal Japan, culture was more than just art. It was performance with repercussions. It's not up to you how you fold a kimono, pour tea, or arrange flowers. It adheres to stringent regulations that predate your entire family tree. All it takes is one lost flower to make you the talk of the town, and not in a light-hearted or flirtatious way. For instance, consider the tea ceremony. It appears to be a tranquil custom. It's actually a social minefield. It's all timed. There is choreography in every move. The visitor must sit exactly as instructed, spin the cup twice, show modest appreciation, and sip in silence while determining in their mind if they have bowed too eagerly, too late, or too early. Error? It's awkward at best. At worst, it's viewed as a moral defect or a flaw in your character that was inherited from your shameful great-granduncle. Next up is calligraphy. Isn't that a lovely way to express yourself? False. It's an assessment of your character, discipline, and inner harmony. The position of your soul is reflected in that brushstroke, which is more than just ink. Untidy handwriting, wearing a sign that reads emotionally unstable and bad at bowing would be appropriate. Poetry is risky too. You don't just write a haiku, you write it on the right kind of paper, in the right season, and with metaphors that allude to your emotional terrain and the natural world without becoming overly intimate. Too fervent, you're not sophisticated, too dry. Are you spiritually aloof, too smart? No one is inviting you to the moon viewing party because you're flaunting yourself. This is a delicate game of culture you take part not to unwind, but to demonstrate your composure, sophistication, and intense fear of coming out as uncultured. In feudal Japan, being beautiful wasn't easy. It's a silk-robed battleground, and if your ikebana arrangement isn't up to par, well, I hope your bonsai is spared by the gods. You wouldn't survive a day in feudal Japan after everything we've seen, including the honor, the hierarchy, the unending rice, and the cleanliness. Not because you're soft or weak, but rather because this wasn't a survival-oriented community. It was made for silent, unrelenting obedience, accuracy, and surrender. Every moment was a test of your posture, your loyalty, and your ability to recite a seasonal greeting in the appropriate emotional tone while bowing at the exact proper depth. There were penalties if you failed. Ritual death at worst, public humiliation at best. No days off, no freedom to be who you were. You were assigned a role at birth, given a script, and told to live out the rest of your life playing it with lethal grace. Deviation was viewed as hazardous rather than brave. The land, the lord, and the clan were more important than the person. Being a samurai meant bearing the burden of centuries of honor, as well as the actual possibility of having to perform a poem before slitting your own stomach. As a peasant, you toiled the field from sunrise till your back ached, praying that neither your lord nor the weather would turn on you. Being a woman meant that your existence was a meticulously planned exercise in sacrifice, silence, and grace. If you were someone else, too. The purpose of the system was to ensure that you remained precisely where you were. Indeed, feudal Japan was breathtakingly gorgeous. The art, poetry, rituals, and architecture are all carefully chosen. But there were jagged edges to that beauty. It took self-control, so strict it could break bones. It required so much respect that it completely engulfed uniqueness. You wouldn't last then. You might laugh too loudly, talk out of turn, or unintentionally cross a threshold with your left foot instead of your right. You would overlook bowing, you would pose a query, you would like to make a modification, and that would be enough to identify you as a danger to the order. However, there is both the tragedy and the genius of feudal Japan. It wasn't intended to be simple, it was designed to last. Artemisia of Caria was a historical anomaly in a time when women were hardly permitted to speak in public, much less lead an army. someone who should never have been feasible under the laws of ancient society. Nevertheless, she was sitting on a throne, carrying the dual responsibilities of queen and naval commander, and she was planning war with some of the most influential men in antiquity. Halicarnassus, a city tucked away on the southwest coast of Asia Minor, present-day Turkey, was controlled by Artemisia. Halicarnassus was officially a tributary of the Persian Empire, which was a patchwork of lands that were frequently sucked into the clutches of local rulers. However, Artemisia didn't only inherit a position of power, it was risky because of her. Her identities carried great weight in an era driven by testosterone and iron. She was a woman by biology, Greek by blood, and Persian by loyalty. Her mother was from the island of Crete, while her father was probably Carian. When her husband passed away, Artemisia took over the throne rather than ceding it to a male heir. That in itself was a silent act of rebellion. She did more than just rule, though. She desired to triumph. Around 480 BCE, Artemisia did something that no other woman of her era dared to do as Xerxes the Great began his fabled invasion of Greece. She volunteered for war to command ships and risk her life, not to sew bandages or say prayers from afar. She provided 5 of her own ships, which were svelte, swift, and lethal, and she personally led them into combat. Furthermore, Xerxes, who ruled over an empire that spanned from Egypt to India, did not merely put up with her. He valued her and listened to her. It was a daring, if not stupid, move. A Greek on the battlefield for Persia? Treasonous. On a warship, a woman? Unimaginable. However, Artemisia had experience. Her motivation was not allegiance to empires or bloodlines. She was engaged in a game of power and survival, and compared to most of the males around her, she played it better. Artemisia asked no permission in a society where men wielding swords divided people. She sailed into history, assembled her fleet, and challenged anyone to stop her. Artemisia essentially made war on her own people, the Greeks, by supporting Xerxes. Even before an oar touched the water, the decision caused some controversy. Furthermore, it went beyond the typical rumors of betrayal. It was a personal matter. She was a traitor in elegant clothes to the Greeks, a queen who became a mercenary, a woman at the table of a foreign king who had exchanged her heritage for favor. However, Artemisia appeared quite unconcerned. She actually stepped up her efforts. Like she belonged at the high table of Persian might, she sailed into the campaign. She did, in many respects. Xerxes, who is well known for surrounding himself with vicious fighters and spies, discovered something he didn't often see in Artemisia: sincerity, sharp, blunt honesty. She gave him the information he needed, not what he wanted to hear. Artemisia talked strategically and clearly in council meetings, where she was surrounded by satraps with bloody boots and decorated generals. She was also rarely in error. Her counsel was shrewd, strategic, and frequently tinged with cautions that others were too arrogant to express. She warned that the narrow straits would negate Persia's numerical superiority and encouraged Xerxes to avoid direct naval conflict with the Greeks prior to the historic Battle of Salamis. However, Xerxes disregarded her due to his arrogance and flattery. He was going to regret his choice. Artemisia's presence, even among her Persian allies, was complex. Her power was disliked by several commanders. She was more than a woman, after all. She was a woman from Greece, one who led her own ships with unsettling accuracy and spoke truth to power. She wasn't present as a symbolic mascot or figurehead. Her goal was to triumph, and many mustachioed warlords who had dedicated their lives to conquering other countries were uneasy about that. Her name, meanwhile, spread like a stain back in Greece. Herodotus, who was from Halicarnassus himself, appeared to be both enthralled and perplexed by her. He recorded her with the wonder and suspicion typically associated with mythological beings. She was like Medusa in a breastplate to some. Others saw him as a misunderstood genius who was superior to most of them and had the gall to think like a man. Artemisia was multifaceted, visionary, traitor, strategist, and loyalist. Above all, though, she was a political animal who was aware of one harsh reality. Identity changes during a battle. Power is all that's left. If Artemisia's courage and intelligence were ever put to the test, it was during the Battle of Salamis. This conflict was no ordinary one. It was the Greco-Persian War naval battle. In the confined straits close to Athens, the enormous and arrogant Persian fleet faced off against a considerably smaller but well-positioned Greek navy. This is where Xerxes' campaign would go awry. Here, Artemisia would execute one of her career's most startling strategic maneuvers. Let's go back a little. Xerxes had been cautioned by Artemisia not to confront the Greeks in these confined straits. She made the right argument that the Persians' size advantage would be negated by their greater agility and topographical knowledge. However, Xerxes disregarded her warning since he was drunk on pride and numbers. He desired a stunning triumph. Instead, he received shame. The Persian lines were engulfed in turmoil as the fight continued. Between sluggish vessels, Greek triremes darted like sharks, formations disintegrated, and ships crashed. It was a massacre. Amid all of this, Artemisia was in charge of her flagship, surrounded by both comrades and adversaries, and attempting to survive a fight that was coming to an end. This is where things start to go crazy. Historians continue to argue over Artemisia's choice when she was being pursued by a Greek ship. She gave the order for her ship to ram and sink another Persian ship, this one belonging to an allied king. The Greeks stopped pursuing her since the move was so unexpected and they assumed she was on their side. She managed to escape unharmed. This is said to have happened when Xerxes, who was observing from a mountaintop, turned to his assistants and cried out, "My men have become women, and my women have become men." It was possibly the greatest compliment he had ever bestowed upon a subordinate, particularly one who had just saved herself by sacrificing a friendly ship. However, Artemisia's action went beyond simple survival. It was a combination of cold-blooded calculation, deception, and strategy. She made a snap choice that saved her ship, her crew, and even her own life after reading the battlefield in real time. It generated controversy. It was cruel. However, it was successful. Artemisia sailed back as one of the few leaders Xerxes still trusted, not as a failure, despite the fact that many Persian commanders perished that day or were banished. Disgraced, the Persian fleet hobbled back from Salamis. The notion of Persian naval superiority was destroyed, ships were lost, and morale was crushed. This was the beginning of the end for many leaders. However, it was a peculiar sort of victory for Artemisia. She was the only competent person in the midst of a disastrous campaign. She had forewarned the king, taken decisive action, and managed to leave unharmed. Xerxes noticed. The Persian war machine had to change course now that it was back on the ground, licking its wounds after defeat. And in a rare instance of open trust, Xerxes once more looked to Artemisia, not as a newcomer, but as his most trusted counselor. He posed a rather intimate query to her. What ought he to do now? Ever direct, Artemisia told him what no arrogant emperor wanted to hear. Back off. She encouraged him to leave his loyal commander Mardonius in charge of the remaining campaign in Greece and head back to Persia. You've gotten what you required. Athens is on fire. Don't try too hard. That was pretty much what she was saying. Amazingly, Xerxes paid attention. One woman's opinion was followed by the man who had disregarded the majority of his war council. What others had only suspected was confirmed in that moment. Artemisia was more than just courageous. She was deadly in politics. She was aware of when to fight, when to lie, and when to go. It was not force that gave her authority. It was the result of clarity, which monarchs and conquerors lacked. Following this, she was given guardianship of Xerxes' boys, which was a significant distinction. You didn't give your heirs to anybody in the courts of old. You selected a person whose judgment could be relied upon and whose commitment was unwavering. Born on the periphery of empire, Artemisia had now positioned herself squarely in the center of it. She returned to Halicarnassus as a figure of indisputable importance, rather than as a queen unsure of her role. Her legend started to spread. She was no longer merely a ruler. She was the one who didn't flinch when confronted by empires. Artemisia had entered a conflict and, in some way, returned stronger than before, whereas others would have resorted to safety and quiet. Even though Artemisia became famous for her military achievements, her legacy expanded beyond the battlefield. Additionally, it flourished in the thoughts of those who documented it, particularly in the writings of Herodotus, the renowned father of history, who was born in Halicarnassus, the city that Artemisia controlled. His description of her life gained an almost uncanny closeness from this geographical similarity. He wasn't writing about a myth from the past. His queen was the subject of his literature. Herodotus, however, did not depict her as a stereotype of female virtue or evil. He portrayed her as a capable, astute, and charismatic leader, something far less often in history. Her bravery, icy practicality, the sinking of the Allied ship, the escape under Greek disarray, and the ruthless genius of it all are all highlighted in his account of the fight of Salamis. Artemisia develops into more than just a commander in Herodotus's writing. She turns into a paradox, respected and suspected, feared and admired. Do not be misled, though, that respect was earned. Despite being under the shadow of strong men like Xerxes and Mardonius, she managed to surpass them all. She floated on vision while they drowned in ambition. She was aware of when to fight and when to disappear. Such wisdom is uncommon. In a society that associated femininity with weakness, it is much more uncommon when it originates from a woman. And maybe that's what Herodotus was most interested in. Artemisia was a mismatch. Not in the cozy categories that historians like to create, and definitely not in the cultural mold of her era. She disobeyed, but she wasn't a rebel. She challenged patriarchy by competence alone, but she wasn't a feminist since the term didn't exist. Her legacy was discreetly transmitted by men who were compelled to acknowledge that she was superior to them, not by monuments or golden sculptures, but rather by echoes and anecdotes. She outthought the war councils. She outmaneuvered them in combat. She also outlasted them in the political arena. Despite their cacophony, the men of her era ultimately need scribes to preserve their legacy. There was something better in Artemisia. Or Herodotus was writing more than history when he set down his scroll and dipped his pen once again. A queen-shaped riddle was being recorded by him. Ironically, after her passing, the name Artemisia remained. It reappeared around a century later, this time as Artemisia the Seku of Caria, a namesake and probable descendant who also controlled Halicarnassus. Even though the second Artemisia never led fleets in combat, she would also physically leave her mark on history. Her claim to fame, constructing the mausoleum at Halicarnassus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Because ancient dynasty politics are always unpleasant, the second Artemisia commissioned this imposing marble monument for her husband Mausolus, who was also her brother. It was more than just a memorial to loss, though. It was a declaration, a tribute to Carian identity, and a reminder of the power formerly possessed by the original Artemisia. Whether the two women were mother and daughter, aunt and niece, or perhaps unrelated, has long been a topic of discussion among historians. However, one thing is evident. By that time, the name Artemisia had come to represent strength, intelligence, and audacious leadership. Future generations carried Halicarnassus's heritage like armor, since it had been so ingrained in the character of the first queen. What's even more intriguing is that the term mausoleum, which we use today to refer to massive burials, was inspired by Artemisia's mausoleum. Stone, anguish, and political theatre gave rise to this linguistic heritage. In addition to her reputation for grieving, the second Artemisia was a capable ruler, carrying on the tradition of female leadership in an area of antiquity when it was anything but common. Remember, however, that the first Artemisia, the naval commander, the queen who counseled Xerxes, and the lady who traversed the Greek world as both an insider and an outsider, lay the groundwork for all of this. The name might have dwindled without her. On a forgotten coast, Halicarnassus might have been just another forgotten city. Rather, it turned into a lighthouse, a location where two strong women boldly and intentionally influenced history. Despite being set apart in time, their tales resonate with one another over the ages. One featured ships, the other stone, and both had names that history was unable to fully bury. The story of Artemisia has always existed in the liminal space between genders, between empires, and between history and folklore. The way her legacy has been debated, twisted, and rewritten over the ages is one of the clearest examples of this. Did she play chess while others were busy swinging swords? Or was she a Greek traitor, a Persian puppet, or just a sovereign? She was regarded by Persians as a devoted leader, one of the few who fought honorably and offered wise counsel. She was obviously more trusted by Xerxes than many of his more experienced generals. That alone says a lot about her political acumen and poise under duress. Her loyalty was regarded as honorable, if not heroic, in the Persian world. It was more complicated to the Greeks. She was seen by many as a turncoat, someone who had abandoned her Greek heritage in order to support an oppressive ruler from the east. Nevertheless, even Herodotus and other Greek chroniclers were unable to deny her cleverness and slyness. In many respects, she served as a mirror for their own inconsistencies, demonstrating that not all Persians were evil and not all Greeks supported Greece. She disregarded the boundaries that war attempted to establish. Then there is the contemporary perspective, in which readers and historians alike are still debating what she stands for. Before feminism, a feminist icon, perhaps. A testament to astute leadership in a society designed to keep her out. Of course, she broke the mold of previous queens not because she matched it, which is why her legacy is so fascinating today. She is still mentioned in naval histories in military circles, frequently as an uncommon example of a woman in command of a warship in antiquity. She is seen in political and literary circles as a representation of rationality in a time of arrogance. Additionally, she occasionally reappears in popular culture, sometimes glamorized, sometimes perverted, but always identifiable. Here's the reality, though. Legacy didn't matter to Artemisia, not in our manner. She wasn't writing memoirs or creating a brand. She was attempting to win, to rule, to survive, and that's why her story endures so well. Vanity and myth-making did not shape it. It was molded by choices, challenging ones, controversial ones, and usually the appropriate ones. Persia was not her home. Greece was not her home. She was her own property. Artemisia's story eventually accomplished what all great stories do as the centuries went by. It changed. She had transcended the realm of history. She evolved into a myth, a metaphor, and occasionally a monster. She was reimagined by writers and dramatists as they saw fit. She was a vicious seductress in several stories. In others, a bloodlust-driven warrior queen. Layers of fear and illusion concealed the real Artemisia, the strategist, the realist, the survivor. A basic truth contributed to some of this misconception. Men were unsure about how to interpret her. A lady who issued commands, who remained strong in the face of conflict, who informed kings they were mistaken and provided evidence. The ancient world was not pleased with that. Thus, storytellers acted as they usually do when confronted with an uncontrollable woman. She was rewritten by them. According to one strange narrative, she was madly in love with a man who didn't reciprocate, and in her misery, she pushed herself off a cliff. It wasn't precisely what a tough naval leader would do, but it suited the story's theme of transforming power into tragedy. According to another story, she was more of a witch than a queen and a poisonous plotter. Throughout history, this pattern has been repeated. Later generations either make a woman into a villain or soften her into a damsel when she becomes powerful due to her intelligence or boldness. Both of the therapies Artemisia received did not respect the truth. Superstition and seduction were not the ways of the genuine Artemisia. She reigned with cold, strategic genius, insight, and reason. She won by playing a man's game according to her own rules, more than anything else that frightened her pursuers. What was to stop other women from doing the same if one woman could? She is still distorted by adjustments until today. For instance, in 300, Rise of an Empire, Hollywood remade her as a femme fatale driven by revenge. Fun? Yes. Correct? Not at all. One thing, however, is demonstrated by the fact that she continues to attract attention and demand reinvention. Her legacy is fierce. The woman they were afraid of survived. She changed, became a myth, into memory. What if more women had been like Artemisia? That is the long, unpleasant question that history keeps posing. Artemisia of Korea did not disappear from history when she disappeared from the archives. She just changed shape. Long after she set sail on her last journey, her legacy spread like the wake of a warship. Her grave is not marked by a stately tomb. There are no surviving statues of her. Nevertheless, her legacy lives on, inscribed on Halicarnassus's bones, muttered in the pages of old chronicles, and discussed in the corridors of every historian who tries to figure out how she managed to accomplish the seemingly impossible. For that is precisely what Artemisia's life was, not possible. When women weren't meant to reign, she did, participated in conflicts where it was forbidden for women to combat. Where women weren't supposed to talk, they offered guidance. Nevertheless, she managed to be heard somehow. She wasn't just put up with. People respected her. That may be her rarest accomplishment. Not only did she survive the ancient world as a powerful woman, but she also gained the kind of reluctant respect that caused even her adversaries to pause. Her name is still a conundrum centuries later, exalted and shrouded at the same time. Perhaps it's appropriate that she isn't as well known as Joan of Arc or Cleopatra. Legend was not pursued by Artemisia. She sought results. She was devoid of tragic romance and epic beauty. She was a strategist, a realist, and a leader. Her narrative was enacted not in poetry, but in the hushed silence of war rooms, the cramped space of a ship, and the prolonged gaze of a king who listened. Her narrative is worth revisiting now. Not only is it a story about a woman in a world dominated by men, but it also serves as a reminder that bravery isn't always accompanied with a crown or a sword. There are moments when it stands on the precipice of power, says the unpopular thing, and plunges right into anarchy. There was no need to save Artemisia. There was no need to rewrite her. She should be recognized for who she was and what she still deserves. Brilliant, deadly, and sharp. She forged her own path through the mists of battle, across hostile seas, and against cultural gravity in a male-built kingdom. Furthermore, Artemisia of Caria will always exist as long as ships are in existence, and history remembers individuals who had the courage to speak up when it is better to remain silent. The naked eye and stone were the only means by which man could discover the secrets of the sky before to the invention of lenses and satellites, and before Copernicus ventured to reorganize the universe. And that was sufficient somehow. Civilizations throughout antiquity gazed up, not merely in awe, but with purpose. The stars weren't just ornaments, they were predictions, gods, calendars, and compasses. Thus came astronomy, the oldest science of all. It was a need long before it had a name. Farmers had to be aware of when to plant. Steering skills were essential for sailors. Priests had to be aware of when to carry out the appropriate ritual at the appropriate time in the heavens, and everyone relied on astronomers who were frequently indistinguishable from mathematics priests or kings. But how did they manage without telescopes? They constructed temples, not only for worship but also for observation. The enormous pyramids of Mesoamerica, Stonehenge in England and Nabta Playa in Egypt, were not merely tombs or altars. They were observatories that were meticulously synchronized with the motions of the stars, moon, and sun. Many were made to record certain patterns of light during equinoxes and solstices, sacred building having an astronomical function. For instance, the massive Amun-Ra temple at Karnak, Egypt, was placed so that on the summer solstice, the sun would rise exactly between its pylons. At Chichen Itza, the Maya constructed El Castillo, a pyramid that, on the spring and fall equinoxes, creates the shadow of a serpent slithering down its stairs. Astronomers in India were able to trace the declination of celestial planets with astonishing accuracy thanks to large stone devices like the Jantar Mantar. These were no coincidences. It wasn't a rough guess. These were calculated cosmic engineering achievements based on data. They weren't alone either. From Babylon to Beijing, from the Andes to the Nile, people were using starlight to sink stone and build with the stars in mind. All they needed was patience, observation, and a strong sense of cosmic order to calculate planetary motions, eclipses, and even retrograde movement. They did more than merely observe the sky. It was mapped, measured, and incorporated into their city's very foundations. Civilizations were silently and remarkably accurately documenting their rhythm in stone long before glass could magnify the stars. When the Sumerians peered up into the sun-baked floodplains of ancient Mesopotamia, they saw structure in addition to stars. They weren't just narrating tales about the heavens around 3000 BCE. All around them, they were structuring life. The sky wasn't arbitrary to the Sumerians. Their task was to correctly comprehend the cosmic schedule. The foundation for what is now known as celestial mechanics was established by these early astronomers. They recognized that these movements weren't chaos after observing the sun, moon, and planets' regular motions. They were timepieces. They created one of the oldest calendars in history in this way, dividing the year according to the moon cycle. Although it had flaws, it was incredibly useful for monitoring ritual and agricultural activities. Speaking of time, we still use the base 60 counting method to measure minutes, seconds, and degrees, which was introduced to us by the Sumerians. From these vantage points, priest astronomers meticulously documented events on clay tablets, such as the appearance of Venus on the horizon, the reddening of the moon during an eclipse, or the reappearance of a star cluster after months below the horizon. What do they say about these observers? Umanu are erudite people who are both spiritual and scientific mentors. Sumerian stargazing would develop into a more organized practice over antiquity. The Babylonians, their descendants, named constellations that are still used today, created extensive star catalogues and made uncanny predictions about eclipses. However, it all started with the Sumerians, who recorded the earliest astrological records we have ever discovered by writing out celestial movements in cuneiform. The most amazing thing about this early science is perhaps how well it merged with mythology. The sky was both heavenly and predictable to them. You could align your harvests, your rituals, and your destiny if you knew the patterns the gods moved in. The Sumerians did not simply gaze up in wonder. Humanity's long-standing affinity with the stars began when they gazed up and started measuring. If the Sumerians started the first astronomical fire, the Babylonians doused it with oil and transformed it into a precise fire. By 1800 BCE, when their kingdom was at its height, Babylonian astronomers were doing more than merely observing the sky. They were anticipating them. Eclipses, planetary conjunctions, and retrograde motion are all remarkably regularly charted, recorded, and projected. They had no guesses. They were doing calculations. The Sumerian tradition of observation was enhanced by the Babylonians' use of mathematics. On clay tablets that are now known as the Enuma Anu Enlil and the Mu Lapin, among of the earliest astronomical manuscripts still in existence, they noted the locations of the moon, planets, and stars. These stories weren't meant for bedtime. Line after line of celestial movements, they were unprocessed data. How long would Venus shine? When would it rise? And when may a solar eclipse occur? In a sense, these tablets were the earliest almanacs in history. The most noteworthy aspect, they were able to forecast lunar eclipses by using a pattern called the Saros cycle, which is a recurring period of about 18 years. They knew it worked, and that was sufficient, even though they didn't know why. Being able to predict cosmic occurrences gave a society that combined astronomy and divination great spiritual and political influence. Furthermore, although the Greeks are frequently given credit for creating the zodiac, the Babylonians actually did so first. They created the basis for the zodiac signs that we still use and abuse today by dividing the sky into 12 equal sections, each of which was linked to a constellation. Yes, you can give thanks to Babylon when someone asks for your sign. The audacity of the Babylonians' mathematics, however, is what truly makes them unique. They employed mathematics techniques to approximate celestial cycles and followed planetary motion, including retrograde routes. Arithmetic that worked, not geometric models, mind you, which the Greeks would use later. And that was more than sufficient in real terms. They viewed the cosmos as a massive machine of recurring cycles, a ledger of patterns. Furthermore, their astronomers weren't merely priests or mystics. They were the first scientists bent over tablets, translating the cosmic rhythms into numbers and symbols. They wrote the sky in the dark. The ancient Egyptians were actually syncing their entire society to the stars, while the Babylonians were preoccupied forecasting eclipses. Astronomy was more than simply a fascination in the Nile Valley. It was a matter of survival. Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, was at the center of it all. The Egyptians saw something remarkable. Every year at dawn, Sirius would reappear on the horizon, shortly before the yearly flooding of the Nile. Their calendar was built around this event, which they called the heliacal rise of Sirius. It was more than just poetic, it was essential. Crop cycles were dictated by the flooding of the Nile, and famine may result from missing that window. A 365-day solar calendar with 12 months of 30 days each and 5 festival days was thus devised by the Egyptians. Centuries before Julius Caesar ever got involved, it was strikingly similar to our current calendar. The Egyptians, however, did not end with Sirius. From their temples, many of which were oriented with startling astronomical accuracy, they monitored the sun, moon, and stars. For example, the Karnak temple was placed so that on the summer solstice, the sun would rise straight through its axis. As the sacred stars rose and set, other temples lined up with them. The pyramids were the next in line. Built in 2560 BCE, the Great Pyramid of Giza was nearly exactly in line with the cardinal points. Its shafts might have been aimed at certain stars, perhaps Sirius and Orion, suggesting a celestial link between the pharaoh's passage into the afterlife and the heavens. This was more than just architecture for graves. Cosmological engineering was what it was. Astronomers were frequently also priests in Egypt. They watched the heavens for signs, omens, and the god's will, in addition to ritual timing. Governance, theology, and astronomy were closely related. Understanding the sky was necessary to control Egypt. It's amazing that they created a whole system for measuring time, orienting structures, and predicting natural occurrences without the use of telescopes or even lenses, all based on meticulous observation and unwavering accuracy. The sky was not a source of amusement for the Egyptians. When they looked up, they beheld a holy clock that was echoing eternity and ticking purposefully. Long before Europeans arrived in the New World, the Maya were developing one of the most advanced astrological systems the world had ever seen deep within the Mesoamerican jungles. They charted the motions of the sun, moon, planets, and stars with an accuracy that still confounds modern researchers, despite without metal tools, wheels, and telescopes. Astronomy was not seen by the Maya as a privilege reserved for the aristocracy. It served as the foundation for society. Every significant religious or political event was synchronized with a corresponding celestial event, and its rulers were viewed as cosmic middlemen. Not only were eclipses, solstices, equinoxes, and Venus cycles noted, they served to justify authority. Their tracking of Venus was one of their most remarkable accomplishments. The Maya connected the recurring 584-day cycle of Venus' disappearance and reappearance in the sky to their calendar and ritual warfare systems. One of the rare pre-Columbian documents still in existence, the Dresden Codex, includes a table detailing Venus' motions across hundreds of years with an inaccuracy of less than 1 day. They continued after that. The Maya created a sophisticated long-count calendar that could record dates spanning thousands of years. About 365 quantiform 20 days, which is astonishingly close to the current value, is how accurately they knew the solar year. They had so sophisticated calendar systems that they operated many at once. The long count for historical chronology, the 365-day solar calendar, Harb, the 260-day ritual calendar, and Tzolk'in. What about the observatories? Although they lacked glass domes, they were brilliant with stone. Mayan priests were able to follow the motions of the Sun and Venus thanks to the El Caracol Observatory at Chichen Itza, which was constructed with certain windows and alignments. Temple stairways and shadow effects, such as the well-known serpent shadow that creeps down El Castillo in the spring and fall, were synchronized with the equinoxes. The Maya were synchronizing their civilization with the heavens, not only observing them. Their temples grew in accordance with the solstices, their rulers were governed by the stars, and their conflicts were synchronized with Venus's travels. They incorporated the cosmos into the fabric of life rather than merely reading it. Astronomy was an issue of state in ancient China, not just a science. As the son of heaven, the emperor reigned with the approval of heaven, a cosmic endorsement that could be withdrawn if the stars gave the wrong signal. Astronomy became both political and holy as a result. The dynasty may change if the sky did. Chinese astronomers were keeping meticulous records of astronomical happenings as early as 2000 BCE. They documented planetary motions, comets, novae, eclipses, and sunspots. Modern scientists still consult some of these records, such as the records of the Grand Historian and the Book of Han, to confirm historical astronomical events. Their recording of a supernova explosion in 1054 CE that was visible throughout the day for 23 days is arguably the most impressive. The leftovers, now known as the Crab Nebula, were identified by modern astronomers using the precise position data that Chinese astronomers had recorded. However, mystical interpretation was not the only source of China's astronomical skill. They created mechanical tools to measure the sun's height and the locations of the stars, including gnomons, shadow-casting rods, and armillary spheres. Indeed, centuries before Europe caught up, the Chinese had functional water-powered astronomical clocks and celestial globes. Chinese astronomers employed the 28 lunar mansions they created from the sky, which were conceptually comparable to Western constellations, for timekeeping and navigation. In order to establish traditional holidays like the Lunar New Year, they also developed the Chinese lunar solar calendar, which harmonized the lunar months with the solar year. The careful documentation of eclipses was one of their major accomplishments. They occasionally connected solar and lunar eclipses to dynastic omens in addition to forecasting them. It was regarded as a failure of the astronomers and occasionally an indication that the emperor had lost the mandate of heaven if an eclipse happened, and the emperor had not been notified. To put it briefly, astronomy was not hidden away in a scholar's study in China. It was fundamental to national existence, governance, and spirituality. The empire paid attention to the truth that the stars conveyed, not just the hour. Astronomy was never a distinct field of study in ancient India. It was entwined with metaphysics, mathematics, philosophy, and ritual. Originally used to determine auspicious timings for rituals, Indian astronomy, known as Jyotisha, or the science of light, developed into one of the most mathematically sophisticated observation systems in antiquity. The Vedas, which were written about 1500 BCE, include the oldest mentions of cosmic happenings. The sun, moon, and planetary cycles are mentioned in these sacred books along with the 27 nakshatras, lunar mansions, that comprised the basis of early Indian sky mapping. These nakshatras served as the foundation for astrological charts and calendars that are still in use in India today, and they were associated with both mythology and computation. However, Indian astronomy was remarkably accurate in addition to being poetic. More accurate models of the solar year were created by ancient scholars than the Julian calendar, which the Romans adopted much later. Centuries before Newton, the axial tilt of the Earth, the elliptical orbits of planets, and even the concept of gravity are all described in the Surya Siddhanta, a fundamental astronomical work that was created approximately 500 CE based on prior knowledge. Aryabhata, who in 499 CE postulated that the Earth revolves on its axis every day, a hypothesis that was hardly considered in other areas of the world at the time, was arguably the most groundbreaking person in Indian astronomy. In addition, he created sophisticated trigonometric functions to aid in astronomical computations and determined the duration of the solar year to be 365.358 days, which is just a small deviation from current figures. In addition, Indian astronomers developed complex sine tables, worked with decimal notation, and measured elevations and angles using armillary spheres and shadow devices. Observations were frequently timed to coincide with planetary conjunctions, solstices, and equinoxes. However, Indian astronomy had a cosmic grace that went beyond its scientific accomplishments. The universe was more than a machine. It was a cycle, an unending dance of space and time. The goal of astronomy was to live in harmony with nature, not to dominate it. According to the Indian perspective, comprehending the skies was a means of comprehending the self, a geometry of spirit in which planets traveled through the soul as well as across the sky. The ancient Greeks glanced skyward and wondered why other cultures relied on the sky for ritual, guidance, or survival. What causes the stars to move? Planets wonder why. Above all, is it possible for reason to understand the universe? The relationship between humans and the heavens underwent a sea change with the advent of Greek astronomy. The Greeks looked for laws where others saw patterns and portents. They were theorists as well as watchers, attempting to use geometry, philosophy, and mathematics to decipher the sky. One of the first to propose that natural causes may account for celestial phenomena was Thales of Miletus. Then came Anaximander, who proposed that the heavens formed a sphere and pictured the Earth floating in space without any support. Though they may seem crass now, these concepts were groundbreaking in their day. With Pythagoras, who saw the universe as a system of perfect harmony, a melody of the spheres regulated by mathematical ratios, the real leap was made. His disciples laid the groundwork for theoretical astronomy by holding that the cosmos could be comprehended through numerical values. Aristarchus of Samos, however, was the one who was closest to contemporary reality. He put up a heliocentric theory in the 3rd century BCE, according to which the Sun, not the Earth, is at the center of the cosmos. Although his theories were disregarded for almost 2 millennia, they sowed the seeds that Copernicus would eventually sprout. The founder of observational astronomy, Hipparchus, followed. He discovered the precession of the equinoxes, divided stars by brightness, made the first star catalogue, and devised trigonometric instruments to determine the positions of celestial bodies. His precision was astounding, particularly in the absence of telescopes. Last but not least was Claudius Ptolemy, whose Almagest was the standard astronomical treatise for more than 1,000 years. He combined information from the Greeks, Babylonians, and Egyptians to create a geocentric model that used epicycles and deferents to describe planetary motion. It was a sophisticated and intricate system that worked until it didn't. Even though some Greek concepts were incorrect, their dedication to logical justification and methodical modeling altered the course of events. The world learned from them that the stars weren't just for nothing. The human intellect was able to comprehend the patterns that regulated them. The Greeks elevated astronomy beyond simple observation. It turned into a dispute between the sky and the earth, between reason and myth, and between our knowledge and what we can see. Humanity had been seeing the stars for thousands of years with only eyes, shadows, and stone by the time the telescope was created in the early 17th century. Nevertheless, the accomplishments of those ancient civilizations are just astounding. Without lenses, satellites, or electricity, they plotted stars, followed planets, forecasted eclipses, and constructed monuments in accordance with the solstices and equinoxes. Their achievements are all the more remarkable because they were accomplished on their own. Astronomical systems based on their respective worldviews were constructed by the Sumerians in Mesopotamia, the Maya in Mesoamerica, the Chinese and Indians in Asia, and the Greeks and Egyptians in the Mediterranean. But even though they were very different, they came to the same conclusions. The order in which the heavens move is important. Astronomy in antiquity was not limited to ivory towers. It influenced philosophy, politics, architecture, religion, and agriculture. When to construct, when to worship, when to grow, and when to rule were all determined by it. Every civilization believed that seeing the sky was a means of comprehending the divine or, at the very least, one's role in the enormous scheme of things. Even if their models differed, some were cyclical, some mythological, and others geocentric, they all had a strong, unshakable respect for the universe. The sky was more than only a background for many ancient peoples. It was sacred, intentional, and living. Everything would alter with the telescope. It showed us Jupiter's moons, Venus's phases, sunspots, and galaxies that were far away from Earth. However, the foundation, the methodical documentation, the meticulous mapping, and the ancients' insatiable curiosity. Every time we check a calendar, use a phone app to track the sky, or commemorate a solstice, we carry on their legacy today. They constructed the groundwork for all GPS satellites and space missions using papyrus, stone, and clay. They asked the proper questions despite their ignorance about cosmic microwave backgrounds and black holes. They noticed when they looked up. Unbeknownst to them, they were the first scientists in the dark. They scrawled their queries faithfully and quietly in the sky. We now have the means to delve further, not just into space, but into our own beginnings, because of them. Something extraordinary occurred in 1803. A young republic that had only been in existence for 3 decades acquired a massive tract of land that instantly doubled its size. The Louisiana Purchase was a geopolitical shockwave, not just a real estate transaction. From the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, France gave the United States more than 828,000 square miles of territory with a single stroke of the pen. This vast, fertile land would eventually give rise to 13 future states. What about the cost? A cool $15 million, or about 4 cents per acre. The fact that nobody, not even the Americans, anticipated this, however, makes it all the more remarkable. Gaining access to the Mississippi River and the vital port city of New Orleans was President Thomas Jefferson's only objective at the time. River trade was vital to the fledgling country. Economic survival depended on who controlled New Orleans, and farmers in the Ohio Valley needed to float their goods south. Jefferson gave ambassadors permission to make France an offer of up to $10 million for New Orleans and a few other adjacent properties. That's all. However, those diplomats were caught off guard when they got there. The Louisiana Territory as a whole, not simply New Orleans, was under French control. Why? Napoleon Bonaparte's France was changing its priorities. Napoleon envisioned a vast empire in North America, but French aspirations in the Caribbean were dashed by the Haitian Revolution. Retaining Louisiana was more trouble than it was worth because of disease, revolt, and growing tensions with Britain. Napoleon did not need marshes and prairies, he wanted money for war. Even before they received Jefferson's full consent, the American negotiators swiftly said yes to an unforeseen chance. This wasn't just a port, after all. It included eventual dominion over the center of the continent, the Great Plains, the Mississippi River, and access to the Rocky Mountains. Jefferson was given more than just land, it was fate. A blank canvas for national development, westward migration, and of course, war. Newspapers rejoiced, but one fact was overlooked. This was not a barren land. Dozens of indigenous nations previously called it home, each with its own alliances, claims, and histories. Therefore, a Paris Agreement would change life throughout a continent, in addition to changing maps. Napoleon Bonaparte, a man with a crown and a headache, was at the center of the Louisiana Purchase. The French Emperor was engaged in too many conflicts in 1803, including those in his own coffers, the Caribbean, and Europe. He therefore made the shocking offer to sell off a third of North America to the nation he had previously intended to keep from becoming continental power. That wasn't how it had begun. Louisiana had been covertly purchased by France from Spain a few years prior under the Treaty of Saint-Ildefonso. Restoring the French colonial empire was one of Napoleon's lofty goals. Louisiana would provide wheat, meat, and supplies to Saint-Domingue, the jewel in the crown of France's Caribbean territories, which is now Haiti. Louisiana wasn't something France desired for its own sake. It desired for it to promote sugar. However, that vision was destroyed by fever and fire. The Haitian Revolution had exploded into a full-scale uprising, spearheaded by former slaves under leaders such as Toussaint Louverture. Tens of thousands of soldiers were deployed by France to suppress it, and thousands of them perished from yellow fever in addition to combat. Napoleon lost his army, his best commander, and his opportunity to retake the world's richest sugar colony. Louisiana lost its significance as Saint-Domingue faded away. It was now indefensible, which was worse than irrelevant. Napoleon also concerned that Louisiana might be seized by force as Britain prepared for another war against France, so he sold it rather than battling to keep it. And in true Napoleonic form, the choice was quick, audacious, and totally practical. He shocked American ambassadors James Monroe and Robert Livingston on April 11, 1803, by offering $15 million for all of Louisiana, not just New Orleans. Napoleon's logic was straightforward. I've given England a marine adversary who will eventually make her feel inferior. Money wasn't his only goal. His goal was for the United States to become powerful enough to oppose Britain. Louisiana's sale was not a surrender, it was a plan. Napoleon thus abandoned his American empire in a single move, altering the course of a nation he seldom respected. What he considered an imperial afterthought would turn out to be the catalyst for America's westward expansion and the beginning of the end for indigenous sovereignty throughout the continent. An agricultural republic, a country of autonomous farmers, bonded by liberty and civic virtue and residing on their own property, was what Thomas Jefferson had long dreamed of. His dream ought to have been realized with the Louisiana Purchase. Instead, it gave him a nightmare about the Constitution. Jefferson adhered to strong constructionist principles. According to him, the federal government should only use the authority expressly provided by the Constitution. And you know what? That text made no mention of the U.S. government purchasing foreign land. There was no legal roadmap for increasing the size of the country in a single transaction, nor was there a rule for buying an entire continent. Jefferson paused. Napoleon's offer seemed almost too good to be true. $15 million for land between the Rocky Mountains and the Mississippi. It was an opportunity that comes only once in a civilization. Jefferson, however, struggled with the paradox. Could a man who was concerned about federal overreach use the Constitution to support such a large purchase? He thought about introducing a constitutional change to approve the transaction in private. However, political realities loomed and time was running out. Delays might result in Britain capturing the area before the ink dries, or Napoleon changing his mind. Jefferson then took an ironic action. Years before, he had chastised Alexander Hamilton for supporting implied powers, which he now supported. He justified the purchase as a treaty which the President may make with the Senate's consent under the Constitution. In October 1803, the Senate overwhelmingly approved the agreement, and Jefferson, although privately concerned, justified his choice by arguing that it was essential to the Republic's survival and security. Jefferson, a constitutional purist, suddenly found himself at the helm of the biggest peaceful land purchase in American history. His detractors, who labeled him a hypocrite, were aware of the paradox. Jefferson, however, believed that it was a necessary compromise that bent the Constitution to protect the Republic rather than undermine it. He established a precedent in doing so. Even in the absence of clear constitutional authority, the federal government might obtain land through treaty. And as the U.S. moved farther west and into areas where other people already resided, that precedent would be brought up repeatedly. They had ratified, sealed, and signed the Louisiana Purchase. However, no one truly understood what the United States had just purchased. The land was huge, hardly surveyed, and teeming with unidentified species, people, rivers, and mountains. Thus, in 1804, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark led the Corps of Discovery, an expedition that would go down in American history as one of the most famous expeditions. Their goal was lofty: investigate the new area, start trading with local people, research the resources there, and, above all, locate a waterway leading to the Pacific Ocean. A northwest passage, a navigable route connecting the Atlantic and Pacific that would transform trade, was Jefferson's ideal. It didn't exist, spoiler alert. However, the discoveries made by Lewis and Clark would continue to change the way Americans perceived their position on the continent. With a crew of more than 30 men, they sailed off from St. Louis in May 1804, traveling upriver into territory that had not yet been settled by Americans. They discovered 178 new plants and more than 100 new animal species on their journey. They drew mountains, traced rivers, and meticulously documented their anthropological and scientific discoveries in journals. They weren't alone, though. A young Shoshone woman named Sacagawea who accompanied her French-Canadian husband on the voyage, was one of the most important participants. Sacagawea was more than a mere interpreter. She represented peace. Native tribes were alerted that this was not a war group by her appearance with a child. Her diplomatic and geographic skills enabled the Corps to forge vital relationships and survive perilous crossings. Over the course of 2 years, the expedition covered over 8,000 kilometers on foot, on horse, and by boat. By 1806, they had arrived in the east. They returned with a thorough report of the newly acquired territory and its inhabitants, which is maybe more valuable than the Northwest Passage they failed to find. A mystery had been bought by Jefferson. It was made real by Lewis and Clark. However, even if their tales sparked aspirations for westward migration, they also hinted at something more sinister: the impending strain on native countries and the unavoidable drive for conquest under the pretext of discovery. The Louisiana Purchase was seen by American officials and people as a land grab, a starting point for towns, farms, and aspirations. However, it was something else entirely: the start of erasure to the indigenous peoples who had inhabited the area for centuries. There were already more than 50 independent indigenous groups on the area the United States had bought from France, each with its own language, territory, and political structure. Long before any European flag had been raised, these groups, from the Ossetian Sioux to the Cheyenne, Comanche, and Mandan, had been managing the land, engaging in trade, and forming alliances. However, Jefferson and later American officials saw the Louisiana Territory as a large, underutilized canvas that was ready for American habitation. The agreement was made without consulting the local indigenous nations. No notice was given to them. They received no payment. They were independent peoples once. They were then proclaimed subjects of the American Republic, which was growing. Jefferson thought that Native Americans could either relocate quietly if possible, or by force if required, or they could assimilate into American society. He stated in private letters that indigenous people would either have to relocate westward or perish as settlers went west. The concept was developing even though it wasn't yet known as removal. After the Lewis and Clark expedition returned with news of natural richness and an abundance of land, this pressure increased. To assert its claim to territory and drive tribes further west, the federal government started signing treaties, many of which were misleading or coercive. These initiatives were sometimes supported by armed force. In others, the cause was dislocation and illness. Before it was given a name, the Louisiana Purchase signaled the beginning of a new stage in American expansion known as Manifest Destiny. This sale served as the legal basis for the idea that the United States was destined to rule the continent, and the lives and lands of indigenous peoples served as the moral price. The Louisiana Purchase was not a transaction for Native Americans. A trespass was committed. It removed boundaries that had never been recognized, redrew maps that had never belonged to them, and let loose a flood of newcomers who came to grab rather than trade. And that was just the beginning of that wave. The peaceful purchase of territory that nearly doubled the size of the United States, the Louisiana Purchase, was celebrated as a victory. On paper, the land sale seemed straightforward, but in practice, it wasn't. The cost of expansion was not wealth, but rather war, uprooting, and cultural devastation. American settlers started moving westward after the new area was secured. They pushed into areas still inhabited by indigenous nations, motivated by the promise of economic opportunity, personal freedom, and lush agriculture. In order to administer and uphold its new power, the federal government built highways, forts, and administrative facilities. This created the conditions for a slow-burning conflict between two perspectives on the land, one that viewed it as a living thing that should be shared and respected, and another that saw it as property that should be claimed and improved. Conflict naturally broke out, skirmishes escalated into wars, and treaties were struck only to be broken. And with the help of railroads, firearms, and unrelenting ambition, the borderline gradually advanced westward. However, Indigenous tribes were not the only ones that suffered. Slavery, another moral dilemma that would ultimately split the country, was exacerbated in the Louisiana Territory. The huge additional areas were instantly viewed by Southern authorities as a chance to increase plantation agriculture. In the southern regions of the region, cotton and sugar flourished, and it was believed that using slave labor was necessary to make it lucrative. An explosive question was raised by this. Would the new territories permit slavery? Congress would be plagued with the answer for decades. Sectional tensions, the Missouri Compromise, and ultimately the Civil War resulted from it. The Louisiana Purchase strained America's political fabric to its breaking point in addition to its borders. There were also effects on the ecosystem. The plains were plowed, the rivers were dammed, and the buffalo were all but exterminated. It was an irreversible and quick change. A patchwork of farms, fences, and industrial extraction replaced the environment that had been sculpted by fire, cattle, and indigenous guardianship. The United States inherited the responsibility of its actions when it seized the land, and discussions about land rights, tribal sovereignty, and reparations continue to reflect this history. The true cost is still being paid even if the land has been bought. A new question surfaced once the ink on the Louisiana Purchase dried. How can you manage a place that is so big it defies description? From Louisiana to Montana and from the Dakotas to Colorado, the territory covered what would eventually become all or a portion of 15 states in the current United States. In 1803, however, it was an uncharted wilderness with many potentialities but few roads, no settlements, and innumerable conflicting claims. Mapping out boundaries, rivers, mountains, and finally property lines was the initial step in the surveying process. The foundation was established by expeditions headed by Zebulon Pike, Lewis and Clark, and others. Maps that would eventually become county lines, reservations, and state borders were created by cartographers, land speculators, and military engineers. The native universe, which had been open and connected, was now being divided into rectangular pieces. The region was originally divided into military districts and then into organized territories by legislation established by Congress, each of which had a governor chosen by the federal government. The Northwest Ordinance's design was adopted by these new governmental divisions. A territory might apply to become a state once it had a sufficient number of residents. However, not all borders were established fairly or logically. For example, Missouri became the first state to be carved out of the Purchase in 1821. Missouri wanted to permit slavery, thus its admission caused a national controversy. An imaginary border was drawn across the Purchase by the Missouri Compromise that resulted. Slavery would be prohibited in the North and permitted in the South. As the status of each new state threatened to shift the balance between the North and the South, that one line would plague American politics for decades. White settlers, frequently ahead of the law, swarmed into the new areas in the meanwhile. They used squatting, preemption, and increasingly federally funded land grants to assert their claims to land. The lands of native peoples, including those with existing treaties, were abruptly redefined as territory, open ground, and finally someone else's farm. Maps were also being erased as they were being filled up. Native pathways, seasonal migrations, and indigenous names are being erased and replaced with names like Fort Pierre, Baton Rouge, and Jefferson City. In this new American perspective, borders were more than just geographic bounds. They served as means of claiming, dividing, selling, and governing territory that had belonged to no president, no state, and most definitely no empire only a few years prior. The Louisiana Purchase changed America's identity in addition to its borders. The United States transformed from a coastal republic embracing the Atlantic to a continental power extending toward the future with a single diplomatic move. Even before the word was coined, it was the first big leap of manifest destiny, and it established the course for the subsequent century of growth, conquest, and innovation. Politically speaking, the Purchase set the precedent that, In the absence of explicit constitutional instruction, the federal government may obtain new territory through treaty. With Florida, Texas, Oregon, Alaska, and Hawaii, that precedent would be applied once again. The United States evolved from a nation to a territory-collecting entity that was constantly seeking west. It fueled a new form of American mythology, the frontier myth, on a cultural level. Stories of tenacious settlers, fearless adventurers, and boundless potential were set against the backdrop of the Louisiana Territory. Every pioneer's fantasy, however, was accompanied by a native nightmare, a recollection of lost territory, breached treaties, and further exiled people. The impact on the economy was enormous. American trade grew centered on the Mississippi River. Cities like Kansas City, New Orleans, and St. Louis developed to become important centers of trade. Farmland replaced fertile plains, and parts of the purchase would become industrial growth engines as gold, silver, and other natural resources were discovered. The underlying legacy, however, is contradictory. American values, opportunity, progress, and independence were symbolized by the purchase. However, it also represented America's greatest shortcomings, including slavery, dispossession, and imperial ambition. It is a tale of victory set on territory that was violently snatched from others. Today, states that are home to millions of people are defined by the limits of the Louisiana Purchase. Where buffalo used to wander, highways now intersect. Where previously there were hallowed places, there are now wheat fields. Nevertheless, the memory of that purchase endures beneath the dirt and asphalt, not only as a transaction, but also as a momentous occasion. It transformed the United States forever. The world was the same. However, the question still stands. Was it only a financial cost? Or, as many would subsequently contend, was it measured in irreplaceable lives, cultures, and landscapes? The Louisiana Purchase was ultimately more than just a land purchase. The change in American identity from a shaky republic clinging to the eastern seaboard to an empire in the making that boldly stretched into the heartland was a turning point. The effects reverberated across generations, rivers, and prairies, even though the ink dried in Paris. It represented opportunity for the United States. It inspired a new sense of confidence in the country, a conviction that expansion was not only desired, but also unavoidable. The United States would eventually be driven to the Pacific Ocean and beyond by that notion, which would solidify into policy and become manifest destiny. Additionally, it solidified a power structure based on development, displacement, and land acquisition. The enigma of the West was over. It was a target. Additionally, it was an open invitation for politicians, speculators, and settlers to uproot what already existed in order to take advantage of the chance. The change was disastrous for indigenous peoples. Instead of an invading army, a faraway government claimed to have purchased the territory they had lived on, traded on, fought for, and honored. There was only a new set of rules and a line on a map, no permission, no negotiations. American colonization sped up cycles of violence, evictions, and cultural destruction. Languages dwindled, reserves were created, bison were killed, and treaties came and went. Although they were never completely eradicated, the native population in the Louisiana Territory had been mainly contained, quieted, or destroyed by the time the dust cleared. Nevertheless, the purchase's legacy is still multi-layered. The infrastructure, economy, and cities that resulted from it contributed to the development of the contemporary United States. The rivers it provided turned into vital conduits. Its natural resources propelled the expansion of industry. Innovation, diversity, and reinvention were made possible by the space it created. However, the specter of that transaction remains. Today, the Louisiana Purchase is seen as a paradox, a daring diplomatic triumph, and a displacement plan. It's a tale of development and loss, of aspiration and forgetfulness. Although it compelled a reckoning that is still going on today, it also helped shape the United States into what it is today. How can you honor a place you never really requested and can never really get back?